I, 26F, listened with a fake smile as my mother's boyfriend Mark looked right at me and said, "You're a burden on this family, and it's about time someone said it." His words hit me like a physical blow, but the true revenge was still to come, hidden within the pages of a final will. You're probably wondering what could possibly follow an insult like that. How could a simple piece of paper change everything? Well, it all started on a night filled with false smiles, fake promises, and a will that would expose every lie. The dinner table was set with my mother's best china, the kind she only brought out when she wanted to impress someone. Tonight, that someone was Mark, her boyfriend of 3 years, who had somehow wormed his way into becoming the unofficial head of our family. My mother, Susan, sat beside him, her hands folded nervously in her lap, while my sister Jessica sat across from me, avoiding eye contact. Mark cleared his throat and started cutting into his steak with precise movements. He was 58 years old, but acted like he owned the world. His gray hair was slicked back, and he wore an expensive watch that he made sure everyone noticed by constantly checking the time. "So, how's the art thing going?" Mark asked me, making air quotes around the word art. "It's going well," I said. "I just finished a commission for a local gallery." Mark laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel small. "A commission," he said. "That's what you call it when someone throws you a few dollars for doodling." "Mark, please," my mother said softly, but he waved her off. "No, Susan. Someone needs to say this," he said. "Your daughter is 26 years old and still playing with paint like a child. When is she going to get a real job?" "Art is a real job," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is it?" Mark asked. "Tell me, how much did you make last month?" I stayed silent. The truth was, it had been a slow month, but that didn't mean my career wasn't valid. "That's what I thought," Mark said. "Meanwhile, your mother and I have been covering your rent for the past 6 months." "That's not true," I said. "Mom helped me with 1 month when I was between commissions." "1 month, 6 months, what's the difference?" Mark said. "The point is, you're not pulling your weight. Jessica here has a real career in marketing. She contributes. She doesn't just take and take and take." Jessica finally looked up, but instead of defending me, she nodded. "Mark has a point," she said. "We're all worried about you." "Worried?" I asked. "Or disappointed?" "Both," Mark said flatly. "Your grandfather would be ashamed to see what you've become. He worked hard his whole life, built a successful business, and for what? So his granddaughter could finger paint." My grandfather, George, had passed away 8 months ago. He was the only person in my family who truly understood me, who encouraged my art and believed in my talent. Hearing Mark invoke his name made my blood boil. "Don't talk about my grandfather," I said. "Why not?" Mark asked. "Someone needs to tell you the truth. You're living in a fantasy world, thinking you're some kind of artist, when really you're just a burden on this family." The words hung in the air like poison. My mother said nothing. Jessica said nothing. They just sat there, letting Mark tear me apart. "I should go," I said, standing up. "Running away again," Mark said. "That's your solution to everything, isn't it? Run away instead of facing reality." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. As I left, I heard Mark say to my mother, "You're too soft on her, Susan. That's why she's like this." The drive home was a blur of tears and anger. I couldn't believe my own family had sat there and let Mark humiliate me like that. My mother, who used to braid my hair and tell me I could be anything I wanted, had said nothing. My sister, who I used to share secrets with late at night, had taken his side. When I got to my apartment, I collapsed on my couch and cried until I had no tears left. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Please don't be upset," it read. "Mark is just trying to help. He cares about this family and wants what's best for everyone. Just go along with it, okay? He's been so good to us since Grandpa died." I threw my phone across the room. "Good to us? Mark had inserted himself into our family the moment my grandfather got sick. He'd started handling the finances, making decisions, acting like he was the new patriarch. And my mother had let him because she was lost without my grandfather. The next few days were a nightmare. Family members I hadn't heard from in months started calling me, repeating Mark's words almost verbatim. My aunt said I needed to grow up and get a real job. My cousin said I was taking advantage of my mother's kindness. Even my grandmother, my sweet grandmother who used to display my childhood drawings on her refrigerator, called to say she was disappointed in my life choices. Mark had poisoned them all against me. He'd spread his lies and made me the family failure, the black sheep, the burden. I was completely alone. That's when I remembered the box. 2 weeks before my grandfather died, he'd called me to his bedside. He was weak, his voice barely a whisper, but his eyes were clear and focused. "I have something for you," he had said, pressing a small wooden box into my hands. Don't open it now. Save it for when you feel truly lost, when everyone turns against you and you don't know what to do. "Grandpa, you're scaring me," I had said. "Just promise me," he had said. "Promise you'll wait until you really need it." I had promised, tucked the box away in my closet, and forgotten about it in the grief that followed his death. But now, sitting alone in my apartment with my family turned against me, I felt truly lost. I retrieved the box from my closet and sat on my bed, turning it over in my hands. It was simple, made of dark wood with a small brass latch. I opened it carefully. Inside were several folded letters and an old leather ledger. The first letter was in my grandfather's handwriting, addressed to me. "My dearest granddaughter," it read. "If you're reading this, then things have gone as I feared they would. Mark is not who he pretends to be. I've been watching him, documenting his actions. The ledger contains everything I've discovered. Follow the clues. Trust Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, and remember, I always believed in you and your art. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." My hands shook as I opened the ledger. It was filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting, dates and numbers, and transactions. At first it looked like gibberish, but as I studied it more carefully, I began to see patterns. Mark had been moving money around, taking small amounts from various family accounts and transferring them to accounts in his name. But there was more. The ledger contained references to something called the Cedar Room. I knew that room. It was a small study in my grandfather's house, barely bigger than a closet that he used for private work. The family had assumed it was cleared out after his death, but what if it wasn't? My grandfather's house was technically still in probate, but the family had access to collect personal items. I drove there the next morning, my heart pounding. The house felt empty without my grandfather's presence, but I pushed through the sadness and made my way to the Cedar Room. The door was hidden behind a bookshelf, just as I remembered. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room looked untouched, exactly as my grandfather had left it. And there, on the desk, was an envelope with my name on it. Inside was another letter from my grandfather, longer this time, explaining everything. Mark had been stealing from the family for years, using his position as my mother's boyfriend to gain access to financial information. He'd convinced my grandfather's investment broker to give him power of attorney during my grandfather's illness, claiming it was what the family wanted. But my grandfather had been smarter than Mark realized. He'd documented everything, built a case against him, and, most importantly, he'd protected me. "I've made arrangements," the letter said. "The will Mark thinks exists is not the real one. The real will is with Mr. Thompson, sealed and witnessed according to every legal requirement. Mark will get what he deserves, and you, my dear, will get what you've always deserved, but never asked for. Be at the will reading, watch their faces, and know that your grandfather loved you more than words can express." I sat in that small room and cried again, but this time they were tears of relief. My grandfather had seen through Mark's manipulation. He'd known what would happen after he died, how Mark would turn the family against me, and He'd planned for it. I called Mr. Thompson that afternoon. He was an older gentleman with a kind voice who had been my grandfather's lawyer for 30 years. "I've been expecting your call," he said. "Your grandfather told me you'd reach out when the time was right." "Is it true?" I asked. "About the will?" "Every word," Mr. Thompson said. "The reading is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I've already notified the family. I expect Mark will be there with bells on, ready to claim what he thinks is his. And my mother? My sister? They've been notified as well," he said. "Your grandfather was very specific about who should attend." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what would happen, how Mark would react when he learned the truth. Part of me was nervous, but another part, a bigger part, was excited. After months of being treated like a failure, like a burden, I was about to watch karma deliver its justice. The next morning, Mark called my mother to gloat. I know because she called me right after, trying to convince me not to attend the will reading. "Mark says it will just upset you," she said. "He knows Grandpa left most everything to the family trust, which Mark will manage. He doesn't want you to be hurt when you don't receive anything substantial." "I'll be there," I said simply. "Please, honey, just skip it," my mother pleaded. "Mark is already planning how to divide everything fairly. He'll make sure you get something nice, maybe some of Grandpa's books, or his watch." "I said I'll be there," I repeated, and hung up. I dressed carefully for the will reading, choosing a simple black dress that my grandfather had once said made me look professional. I wanted to look composed, confident, nothing like the burden Mark had painted me as. When I arrived at Mr. Thompson's office, the family was already gathered in the waiting room. Mark was holding court, talking loudly about his plans for my grandfather's estate. "The house will need to be sold, of course," he was saying. "The market is perfect right now. We could get at least $800,000 for it, and the stocks should be liquidated and distributed equally among the family members who actually contribute." He looked at me when he said that last part, a smug smile on his face. Jessica was nodding along, already spending her inheritance in her mind. "I could finally pay off my student loans," she said, "and maybe put a down payment on a condo." My mother sat quietly beside Mark, her hand in his. She looked uncomfortable, but said nothing to challenge him. Other family members were there, too. My aunt and uncle, a few cousins, all looking eager and greedy. It made me sick to see how quickly they'd forgotten my grandfather and focused only on what they could get from his death. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Thompson said, appearing in the doorway. We filed into his office, a large room with leather chairs and walls lined with law books. Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk, a thick folder in front of him. There was another man there, too, younger, who Mr. Thompson introduced as his associate. "Before we begin," Mr. Thompson said, "I want to make it clear that this will was drafted by George Henderson with full mental capacity, witnessed by multiple parties, and is completely legally binding. Any attempts to contest it will be met with the full force of the law." Mark shifted in his seat, but maintained his confident smile. "Of course," he said. "George was sharp as a tack until the end. We all know that." Mr. Thompson opened the folder and began to read. "I, George Henderson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The first few bequests were small, sentimental items to various family members. My aunt received my grandmother's china. My uncle got my grandfather's golf clubs. Each cousin received a small monetary gift, a few $1,000s each. To my daughter, Susan Henderson Mills," Mr. Thompson continued, "I leave a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 to be managed by the executor of my estate, with the stipulation that it cannot be accessed by anyone other than Susan herself." My mother looked surprised. Mark's smile faltered slightly. He had clearly expected to have control over any money left to my mother. "To my granddaughter, Jessica Mills," Mr. Thompson read, "I leave my wife's jewelry collection with the hope that she will treasure it as much as her grandmother did." Jessica smiled, pleased with her inheritance. The jewelry was valuable, worth probably $20,000. "Now," Mr. Thompson said, adjusting his glasses, We come to Mark Winters. Mark sat up straighter, his greedy eyes gleaming. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. To Mark Winters, Mr. Thompson read, who has served as my family's financial advisor and manager for the past 3 years. I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. Mark's face turned red. That must be a mistake, he said. There's more, Mr. Thompson said. This bequest comes with a condition. Before receiving his dollar, Mr. Winters must first settle all debts he has incurred against the family estate. What debts? Mark sputtered. This is ridiculous. Mr. Thompson pulled out another folder, thick with documents. I have here a certified audit of the family finances conducted by an independent firm at Mr. Henderson's request. It shows that over the past 3 years, Mr. Winters has embezzled approximately $300,000 from various family accounts. The room erupted. My mother gasped. Jessica's mouth fell open. Mark jumped to his feet. This is lies, he shouted. All lies! George was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. Mr. Winters, Mr. Thompson said calmly, I'd advise you to sit down. There are police officers waiting outside this office. If you attempt to leave, you will be arrested. Mark's face went from red to white. He sank back into his chair. You set me up, he said, looking at me with pure hatred. I didn't do anything, I said. My grandfather did. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. Shall I continue with the will? Everyone nodded, still in shock from the revelation about Mark. To my granddaughter, Mr. Thompson read, and everyone turned to look at me. To my granddaughter, who has been called a burden but is actually a blessing, who has been told her art is worthless but actually creates beauty in this world, I leave the remainder of my estate. He paused, letting the words sink in. This includes my house, valued at $800,000. My stock portfolio, currently valued at $1.2 million. And my 60% stake in Henderson Industries, which I founded 40 years ago, and which is currently valued at approximately $3 million. The silence in the room was deafening. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This couldn't be real. Furthermore, Mr. Thompson continued, I name my granddaughter as the sole executor of my estate, with full power to make all decisions regarding the distribution of assets and the management of Henderson Industries. Mark exploded. He lunged across the room at Mr. Thompson, screaming about forgery and lies and lawsuits. The associate quickly opened the door, and 2 police officers entered, restraining Mark. Mark Winters, one of the officers said, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. As they dragged him out, Mark looked at my mother. Susan, tell them this is a mistake. But my mother just sat there, staring at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Jessica was the first to speak after Mark was gone. This can't be right, she said. Why would Grandpa leave everything to her? She doesn't know anything about business or money management. Actually, Mr. Thompson said, Mr. Henderson left a letter explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it? I nodded, still too stunned to speak. Mr. Thompson pulled out another paper and began to read in my grandfather's words. To my family, I know this will come as a shock to many of you. You've been led to believe that my granddaughter is a failure, a burden, someone who doesn't contribute. But you're wrong. She is the only one among you who followed her passion despite opposition, who stayed true to herself despite criticism, who showed kindness despite receiving none in return. Mark Winters is a con man and a thief. I've documented his crimes extensively, and I hope by the time you hear this, he will be facing justice. To those of you who sided with him, who let him turn you against my granddaughter, I hope you learn from this. You chose greed over family, lies over truth. To Susan, my daughter, I'm disappointed that you let this man control you and poison your relationship with your daughter. The trust fund I've left you is enough to start over, to build a life free from manipulation. I hope you use it wisely. To Jessica, my granddaughter, you have abilities and talents, but you also have a cruel streak that you got from neither of your parents. The jewelry I've left you belonged to your grandmother, who always hoped you would grow to be kind. I hope wearing her pieces reminds you of the person you could be. And to my dearest granddaughter, the artist, the dreamer, the one they called a burden, I leave you everything else, because you are the only one who understood that the true value of life isn't in money or power, but in creating something beautiful, in being true to yourself and showing love, even when it's not returned. You were never a burden. You were always my greatest joy. Use this inheritance to continue your art, to follow your dreams, and to never let anyone make you feel less than you are again. And remember, success is the best revenge. By the time Mr. Thompson finished reading, I was crying. My mother was crying too, but for different reasons. Jessica looked angry and bitter. "We'll contest this," Jessica said. "This is obviously undue influence. She manipulated Grandpa when he was sick." "I wouldn't advise that," Mr. Thompson said. Mr. Henderson took every precaution. The will was witnessed by 3 independent parties, including a doctor who certified his mental capacity. Any attempt to contest it will not only fail, but will also require you to pay legal fees. "This isn't over," Jessica said, storming out of the office. My mother approached me slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. Mark, he just seemed so confident, so sure of everything. After your grandfather died, I didn't know what to do, and Mark was there, taking charge, making decisions. I didn't realize what he was doing." "You let him call me a burden," I said. "You sat there and said nothing while he tore me apart." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I failed you. I failed as a mother. I chose him over my own daughter, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life." I wanted to forgive her, to hug her and tell her it was okay, but it wasn't okay. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "I need time," I said. She nodded and left, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Mr. Thompson and I spent the next hour going over the details of the estate. There was so much to process, so much to understand. But one thing was clear. My grandfather had thought of everything. He'd protected his assets, documented Mark's crimes, and ensured that I would be taken care of. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," Mr. Thompson said. "He talked about you constantly. He was so proud of your art, of your courage to pursue your passion despite the family's disapproval." "I miss him," I said. "He knew you would," Mr. Thompson said. "That's why he did all this. He wanted to make sure you knew how much he loved and believed in you." As I left Mr. Thompson's office, I felt like I was walking on air. In one afternoon, everything had changed. I'd gone from being the family burden to being the head of the family empire. Mark was in jail. Jessica and my mother were forced to face the consequences of their choices. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News of Mark's arrest spread quickly through our social circle. It turned out I wasn't his only victim. He'd been running similar schemes with 3 other families, pretending to be their financial advisor while stealing their money. The police built a strong case against him, and his lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. My mother called me every day for a month, leaving voicemails apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. The hurt was still too raw. She'd chosen Mark over me, believed his lies, let him destroy our relationship. That wasn't something that could be fixed with a simple apology. Jessica tried a different approach. She attempted to guilt me, saying I was destroying the family by not sharing the inheritance. When that didn't work, she tried to manipulate me, suggesting that Grandpa would have wanted me to take care of everyone. Finally, she resorted to threats, saying she would tell everyone that I had manipulated a sick old man. I responded by hiring a lawyer to send her a cease and desist letter. I was done being pushed around by my family. The house was the hardest part. My grandfather's house held so many memories, good and bad. I spent weeks going through his things, like finding treasures and memories in every room. In his bedroom, I found a box of every art piece I'd ever given him. From finger paintings when I was 5 to the portrait I'd painted of him last Christmas, he'd kept them all. In his office, I found files and files of information about Mark, and my grandfather had been investigating him for 2 years, slowly building a case. He'd hired private investigators, forensic accountants, even a handwriting expert to verify forged documents. He'd known exactly what Mark was doing, but had waited for the right moment to expose him. There was also a file about me. It contained every newspaper clipping about my art shows, every positive review, every mention of my work. There were receipts showing that he'd anonymously purchased several of my paintings through third parties, not wanting me to know he was supporting me financially, but unable to resist owning my work. The company was another revelation. Henderson Industries was a successful manufacturing firm that my grandfather had built from nothing. The board of directors was skeptical about me taking over, but my grandfather had prepared for that too. He'd left detailed instructions about his vision for the company, and he'd made it clear that if the board didn't support me, he'd structured things so I could dissolve the board entirely and start fresh. I didn't want to run the company day to day. That wasn't my passion. But I could guide its direction, ensure it remained true to my grandfather's values. I hired a CEO I trusted and remained as chairman of the board, involved in major decisions, but free to pursue my art. With my inheritance, I opened my own gallery, not just to display my work, but to showcase other struggling artists who, like me, had been told their dreams weren't valid. The gallery became a haven for creativity, a place where art was valued for its beauty and meaning, not just its commercial potential. 6 months after the will reading, my mother showed up at the gallery. She looked different, healthier somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said, "trying to understand how I let Mark control me like that. How I let him turn me against my own daughter." "Anne?" I asked. "And I realize now that I was scared," she said, "after your father died. And then, when Grandpa got sick, I was terrified of being alone, of making decisions. Mark seemed so confident, so sure of everything. I let him take over because it was easier than facing my fears." "You hurt me," I said. "You let him hurt me." "I know," she said, "and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself. I'm trying to become the mother I should have been. It was a start, not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning." Jessica never came around. She remained bitter, convinced that I had somehow cheated her out of her rightful inheritance. She told anyone who would listen that I was a manipulator, a con artist who had fooled our grandfather. Most people, knowing the truth about Mark and having seen the evidence of his crimes, didn't believe her. She eventually moved to another state, cutting ties with the family entirely. I often think about that dinner, that horrible night when Mark looked me in the eye and called me a burden. It was meant to break me, to make me feel worthless and small. Instead, it was the catalyst for everything that followed. If he hadn't been so cruel, so obvious in his manipulation, I might never have opened my grandfather's box. I might never have discovered the truth. Mark had been right about one thing. I'd been a burden, but not to my family. I'd been a burden to his plans, a problem he couldn't solve, a person he couldn't control. My grandfather had seen that. He'd known that my independence, my refusal to conform, would be the thing that saved me from Mark's influence. The last time I visited my grandfather's grave, I brought one of my paintings. It was a portrait of him, painted from memory, showing him as I remembered him, strong, wise, with a twinkle in his eye that suggested he knew more than he let on. "You got him, Grandpa," I said to the headstone. "You got him good." I like to think he would have smiled at that. The gallery is thriving now. We've hosted dozens of shows, launched several careers, and proved that art has value beyond money. I still paint every Hans day, creating pieces that come from my heart, not caring whether they'll sell or not. That's the freedom my grandfather gave me. The ability to be myself without apology. Sometimes when I'm working late in my studio, I think about Mark in his prison cell. I wonder if he thinks about that dinner, about the moment he sealed his fate with his cruelty. He thought he was destroying me, but instead, he destroyed himself. He thought he was stealing a fortune, but instead he revealed his true nature and lost everything. My mother and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. She comes to all my gallery openings now, proud and supportive in a way she never was when Mark was around. She's dating again, a nice man who respects her opinions and doesn't try to control her. She's learned from her mistakes, and while the scars remain, we're healing. The other family members who had turned against me came crawling back once they learned about the inheritance. Suddenly, I wasn't a burden anymore. I was their successful cousin, their accomplished niece, their talented granddaughter. I was polite, but distant. They had shown me who they really were, and I wouldn't forget it. Mr. Thompson became a trusted advisor and friend. He told me stories about my grandfather, about the man he was in business and in life. He showed me how my grandfather had built his success, not through manipulation or greed, but through hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect. He always said you reminded him of himself, Mr. Thompson told me once, not in your interests or talents, but in your spirit. You both refused to let others define you. The company has flourished under my leadership. I've implemented programs to support local artists, creating partnerships between industry and art that my grandfather would have loved. We've commissioned murals for our factories, sculptures for our offices, turning workplaces into spaces that inspire creativity and beauty. But the best part, the sweetest revenge, isn't the money or the company or even the gallery. It's the knowledge that I was never a burden. I was never worthless. I was exactly who I was meant to be. And my grandfather saw that when no one else did. Mark tried to paint me as a failure, but I was just someone finding my own way. He tried to isolate me, but he only revealed who truly cared about me. He tried to steal everything, but he ended up with nothing. That night at dinner, when he called me a burden, he thought he was winning. He had my family under his spell, the money within his grasp, his control complete. He never imagined that a dying old man had seen through his schemes and planned the perfect response. My grandfather once told me that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's succeeding despite them. It's proving them wrong, not through words, but through actions. It's living your best life while they watch from the sidelines, knowing they had the chance to be part of it and threw it away. Every morning, I wake up in my grandfather's house, now my house, and I look at the paintings covering the walls. My paintings, the ones he secretly bought, the ones he treasured, the ones that Mark said were worthless doodles. They're worth something now, not because of their monetary value, but because they're proof that believing in yourself is never a burden. Mark will be in prison for another 14 years. When he gets out, he'll have nothing. No money, no reputation, no family. He'll be the burden he accused me of being, relying on others' charity, struggling to survive. Sometimes I wonder if he'll think about that dinner, about how different things could have been if he'd just been kind. But probably not. People like Mark don't learn. They don't grow. They just look for the next victim, the next family to infiltrate, the next fortune to steal. But he won't find it as easy next time. His name is known now, his crimes public record. He's marked as the con man he always was. Jessica still posts bitter messages on social media sometimes, vague references to family betrayal and stolen inheritances. Our mutual friends have mostly unfriended her, tired of her negativity and obvious jealousy. She's become the bitter person she always accused me of being, poisoned by her own greed and disappointment. My mother sent me a letter recently, a long, handwritten apology that must have taken her hours to write. She detailed every moment she'd failed me, every time she'd chosen Mark's lies over my truth. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. She wanted me to know that she saw it all now, clearly, and that she would carry the regret for the rest of her life. I wrote back a short note saying I appreciated her honesty and that maybe someday we could be close again. But not yet. The wounds were healing, but slowly, and trust once broken is hard to rebuild. The art community has embraced me and my gallery. We've become known as the place where real artists go, where commercial success isn't the only measure of value. Young artists come to me for advice, and I tell them what my grandfather told me: believe in yourself even when no one else does. I've started a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name for art students whose families don't support their dreams. Every year I select 5 students and pay for their education, supplies, and living expenses. I tell them they're not burdens, they're blessings the world hasn't recognized yet. Mr. Thompson helped me set up the fund, making sure it was legally airtight and financially sustainable. He said my grandfather would have loved it. This way of turning pain into purpose, of helping others avoid what I went through. Your grandfather always said money was just a tool, Mr. Thompson told me. It's what you do with it that matters. What I have done with it is create a life where I can be myself, where I can support other artists, where I can prove every day that following your passion isn't a burden, it's a gift. The last painting I did of my grandfather hangs in the gallery's main entrance. It shows him in his study, surrounded by the ledgers and documents he used to expose Mark, but he's smiling, looking directly at the viewer with warmth and love. Underneath, I've placed a small plaque with his words from the will: "Success is the best revenge." Visitors often ask about the painting, about the man in it, and why he looks so satisfied. I tell them he was my grandfather, a man who saw through lies, protected what he loved, and made sure justice was served, even from beyond the grave. Mark thought he'd won that night at dinner. He thought he'd broken me, isolated me, destroyed my spirit. He thought he'd secured his fortune and his place in our family. He thought wrong. My grandfather had taught me many things over the years, but his final lesson was the most important. Never let anyone make you feel like a burden for being yourself. Never let anyone dim your light because it makes them uncomfortable. Never let anyone steal your joy, your passion, or your dreams. The inheritance was nice. The money gave me freedom, and the company gave me influence. But the real gift my grandfather gave me was validation. He saw me, the real me, and he found me worthy. Not just worthy of love, but worthy of everything he'd built, everything he'd saved, everything he'd protected from Mark's greedy hands. I think about that dinner often, not with pain anymore, but with a kind of dark satisfaction. Mark showed his true colors that night, revealed himself as the small, petty, cruel man he really was. And in doing so, he triggered the series of events that would destroy him. If he had just been kind, just been decent, things might have been different. The will would still have exposed his theft, but maybe the family would have rallied around him, helped him somehow. But his cruelty, his need to humiliate me, to break me down, that's what turned everyone against him in the end. Even my mother, who had been completely under his spell, couldn't defend him after seeing how viciously he'd attacked me for no reason other than his own ego. Even Jessica, who had supported him, couldn't explain away his theft once it was exposed. He created his own downfall with his arrogance and cruelty. My grandfather just made sure he faced the consequences. I run the company board meetings now with confidence I never knew I had. I make decisions that affect hundreds of employees, and I do it with my grandfather's wisdom guiding me. Treat people with respect. Value integrity over profit. Build something that lasts. The board members who initially doubted me have become my strongest supporters. They've seen how I've modernized the company while keeping its core values intact. We're more profitable than ever, but we're also more ethical, more community focused, more human. One board member told me recently that I reminded him of my grandfather in his younger days. Same determination, he said. Same refusal to compromise on what matters. The gallery has become my sanctuary. Every morning before it opens, I walk through the exhibits, looking at the art we've displayed, remembering my grandfather's belief in me. We've shown everything from sculptures made of recycled materials to paintings that challenge social norms, art that makes people think, feel, question. Last month, we had a young artist whose family had disowned him for pursuing art instead of medicine. His story resonated with me so deeply that I spent extra time mentoring him, helping him price his work, teaching him the business side of art. His first piece sold for $5,000, and he cried in my office. They said I was wasting my life, he told me through tears. They said I'd never amount to anything. People say a lot of things, I told him. What matters is what you believe about yourself. I've hired some of the artists we've showcased to create pieces for Henderson Industries. The factories that once looked industrial and cold now feature murals telling the story of American manufacturing. The corporate offices showcase rotating exhibits from local artists. It's my way of bridging two worlds that seemed incompatible. Mark's old office at my mother's house has been turned into an art studio. She took classes and discovered she has a talent for watercolors. Yes, it's her way of reclaiming her space, of removing his influence from her life. She painted a portrait of me last month, and while it's amateur, it's beautiful because it comes from a place of love and regret and hope. The investigation into Mark's crimes revealed even more victims. He'd been running his schemes for over a decade, targeting vulnerable families, usually ones with elderly patriarchs or matriarchs. He'd present himself as a savior, someone who could handle the complex finances, and then slowly drain their accounts. The prosecutor told me my grandfather's documentation was instrumental in building the case. Even from beyond the grave, he was protecting not just me, but other families Mark might have targeted. I testified at Mark's trial. I sat in that witness box and told the court about the dinner, about the emotional abuse, about how he'd turned my family against me, but I also told them about my grandfather's strength, his foresight, his refusal to let Mark win. Mark wouldn't look at me during my testimony. He sat there in his orange jumpsuit, his expensive watch replaced with handcuffs, his slicked back hair now gray and unkempt. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the wizard after the curtain was pulled back. When the judge read the sentence, 15 years, Mark finally looked at me. There was hatred in his eyes, but also something else. Disbelief. He still couldn't understand how the burden, the failure, the worthless artist had brought him down. The truth is, I didn't bring him down. He brought himself down. My grandfather just made sure there was a net waiting to catch him. The family reunions are smaller now. Jessica refuses to attend, and some of the extended family members who sided with Mark are too embarrassed to show their faces. But the ones who come are genuine. They're there for connection, not money, for family, not inheritance. My aunt apologized to me at the last reunion. She said Mark had convinced her that I was lazy, that I was taking advantage of the family's generosity. She hadn't questioned it because it was easier to believe the lie than to stand up for me. I should have known better, she said. You were always such a kind child, always drawing pictures for everyone, always trying to make people smile. I'm sorry I forgot who you really were. Forgiveness comes slowly, but it comes. Not for all of them, but for some. The ones who genuinely realize their mistakes, who acknowledge the harm they caused, who work to make amends. I've kept Mark's dollar, the $1 my grandfather left him in the will. Mr. Thompson had it framed with a copy of that section of the will. It hangs in my office at the gallery, a reminder that karma sometimes has a sense of humor Visitors sometimes ask about it, this framed dollar bill with the legal document. I tell them it's a reminder that you can't put a price on integrity, that greed costs more than it pays, and that sometimes the smallest amount can carry the biggest message. The young artists I mentor often struggle with family disapproval, and their parents want them to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. Stable careers, they say, reliable income. They come to me with the same doubts I once had, the same fear that maybe their families are right, maybe they are wasting their lives. I tell them about the dinner, about Mark, about my grandfather, about how the very thing that made me seem like a burden to some was what made me valuable to the one person who mattered. I tell them that their art, their passion, their refusal to conform isn't a weakness. It's their strength. One girl, barely 20, came to me in tears because her father had threatened to cut her off if she didn't switch her major from art to business. I helped her apply for scholarships, found her a part-time job at the gallery, and became the support system her family refused to be. She's thriving now, her paintings selling faster than she can create them. Her father came to one of her shows recently, saw the red sold stickers on every piece, saw the people admiring his daughter's work. He apologized to her that night, admitted he'd been wrong. Not all the stories end that way. Some families never come around, never see the value in what their children create. But that's okay. We become our own family. We artists and dreamers and the people who are told we're not enough, we support each other, celebrate each other's successes, cushion each other's falls. The scholarship recipients have started calling themselves George's grandkids, even though none of them are related to him. They wear it as a badge of honor, these young artists who were told they were burdens but are proving their blessings. Every year on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, they organize an art show in his memory. The pieces are always about transformation, about overcoming adversity, about finding your voice when others try to silence it. The money raised goes back into the scholarship fund, ensuring future artists will have the support they need. Mr. Thompson attends every show. He tells me my grandfather would have been so proud, would have loved seeing his legacy used this way. He's become like a grandfather to me himself, filling some of the void left by my grandfather's passing. Your grandfather played the long game, he told me once. He knew Mark would eventually show his true colors, and he wanted to make sure you were protected when he did. The company has started an Artist in Residence program. Every quarter we bring in an artist to work with our employees to bring creativity into the corporate world. It's been surprisingly successful. Productivity is up, employee satisfaction is higher, and we've even had some innovative solutions come from the collaboration between artists and engineers. One artist taught our accounting department to paint during lunch breaks. Now they have a small gallery in their break room showcasing their work. The CFO, a man who'd never held a paintbrush before, discovered he has a talent for abstract art. He told me it helps him see numbers differently, patterns and relationships he hadn't noticed before. This is what my grandfather understood that Mark never did. Art isn't separate from business, from life, from success. It's part of it. It makes everything richer, deeper, more meaningful. Mark saw my art as a waste because he could only measure value in dollars. He couldn't see the joy it brought, the connections it created, the way it made people feel. He couldn't see that my grandfather displayed my childhood drawings, not because they were technically good, but because they were pieces of my heart, gifts of love that money couldn't buy. I've received 3 letters from Mark in prison. I haven't opened them. Mr. Thompson offered to read them for me to make sure there was nothing legally important in them, but I declined. There's nothing Mark could say that I need to hear. His words lost their power over me the moment my grandfather's will was read. Jessica reached out once, through a mutual friend, suggesting we should reconcile, that we should share the inheritance like sisters should. The mutual friend was embarrassed to even deliver the message, knowing how Jessica had treated me. I sent back a simple response. She made her choice at that dinner. The mutual friend later told me Jessica had expected me to cave, to feel guilty enough to share. She still doesn't understand that this was never about money for me. It was about respect, about belief, about being seen for who I really am. My mother and I have started having monthly lunches. They're awkward sometimes, filled with long silences and careful conversation, but we're trying. She shows me her watercolors, and I give her gentle critiques and encouragement. She's learning to be supportive in a way she never was before. I see you now, she told me recently. The real you. Not the you Mark made me believe existed, but the actual you. And you're amazing. It's not enough to erase the past, but it's something. It's a start. The house feels different now that it's mine. I've kept most of my grandfather's things, but I've also made it my own. The walls are covered with art, not just mine, but pieces from all the artists we've showcased. It's become a living gallery, a testament to the power of following your passion. I turned one room into a studio where I can paint in natural light. Sometimes I feel my grandfather there with me, especially when I'm struggling with a piece. I hear his voice telling me to trust my instincts, to paint from my heart, to ignore the voices that say I'm not good enough. The first painting I created in that studio was of the dinner, not a realistic depiction, but an abstract representation of how it felt. Dark swirls of red and black for Mark's cruelty, gray shadows for my family's silence, but in the corner, a small but bright spot of gold. That was my grandfather's plan, already in motion, waiting to turn everything around. A collector offered me $50,000 for that painting, but it's not for sale. It hangs in my bedroom, a reminder of the worst night of my life that led to the best outcome I could have imagined. The gallery is hosting a special exhibit next month called Burdens to Blessings. It features artists who were told they were wasting their lives, who were discouraged by their families, who were made to feel like failures for following their dreams. Each piece tells a story of transformation, of proving the doubters wrong. I'm contributing a piece to the exhibit. It's a portrait of my grandfather, but not a traditional one. It's made up of hundreds of tiny images, all the paintings I created over the years that he secretly collected. From a distance, you see his face, his knowing smile. Up close, you see my journey as an artist, the very thing Mark called worthless. The exhibit opening is already sold out. People want to see these stories of triumph, to be reminded the people who try to tear you down don't get to win, that sometimes the burden they complain about is actually the weight of wings learning to fly. Mark will have served 1 year of his sentence by then. I wonder if he knows about the exhibit, if someone has told him how the burden he tried to crush has become a beacon for other artists. I wonder if he regrets that dinner, not because of where it led him, but because of the cruelty itself. But I doubt it. People like Mark don't really change. The truth is, I should thank him, not for the pain he caused, but for the clarity. His cruelty forced me to open my grandfather's box, to discover the truth, to claim my inheritance. Without that dinner, I might have spent years trying to win my family's approval, dimming my light to make them comfortable. Instead, I shine brighter than ever. My art is bold, unapologetic, real. The gallery showcases voices that might otherwise be silenced. The company balances profit with purpose. The scholarship ensures future artists won't have to face what I faced alone. This is my revenge, not served cold, but burning bright. Every success, every piece of art created, every young artist supported. Every day, I wake up in my grandfather's house and know I earned it through being myself, not despite it. My grandfather knew that true wealth isn't just money in the bank. It's the freedom to be yourself, the power to help others, the ability to create something meaningful. He gave me all of that, wrapped in a will that destroyed the man who tried to destroy me. Sometimes I visit my grandfather's grave and tell him about everything that's happened, about the gallery's success, the company's growth, the artists we've helped. I tell him about Mark's imprisonment, Jessica's bitterness, my mother's slow journey toward redemption. But mostly, I thank him for seeing me when others didn't, for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself, for playing the long game and ensuring that truth would triumph over lies, that art would triumph over greed, that the burden would become the blessing. The headstone has a new addition now, something I had installed with Mr. Thompson's help. Below my grandfather's name and dates, there's a small plaque that reads, "He saw the artist in the burden, the blessing in the dreamer, the truth in the lies." His legacy lives on in every stroke of paint, every act of courage, every moment of justice served. People sometimes ask me if I'm happy now, if the money and success have filled the void left by my family's betrayal. The answer is complex. The money gave me freedom, but it didn't heal the wounds. The success proved them wrong, but it didn't erase the pain of that dinner. What makes me happy is the art, the creation, the ability to wake up every day and do what I love without apology. The knowledge that my grandfather's faith in me was justified. The sight of young artists finding their voices despite opposition. That's the real inheritance my grandfather left me. Not just money or property or company shares, but the unmovable conviction that I was never a burden. I was always exactly who I was meant to be. And Mark? He's the one who became the burden. A burden on the justice system, a burden on the taxpayers funding his imprisonment, a burden on his own conscience if he has one. He who called me worthless is now worth less than that dollar my grandfather left him. The irony is perfect, poetic even, the kind of ending my grandfather must have imagined when he planned all this. The burden became the blessing. The accused became the accuser. The worthless became the worthy. And the will, that beautiful, terrible, perfect will, made sure everyone knew the truth in the end. That's my story. The story of a dinner that changed everything, a grandfather who saw everything, and a will that fixed everything. The story of how being called a burden became the greatest gift I ever received, because it triggered the revelation of who really carried dead weight and who actually carried the family forward. My grandfather always said that living well is the best revenge, but sometimes, just sometimes, a well-crafted will that exposes crimes, destroys a con man, and elevates the one they tried to tear down is even better. And that dollar bill, framed on my wall, reminds me every day that Mark got exactly what he deserved, $1, in a prison cell, while I got everything else. The burden he complained about became the blessing he could never be.